I've set myself a challenge. I want to build my family a garden room using salvaged materials for under £500. For over 6 months now, I've been on a mission to find free and low-cost building materials with this build in mind. You won't believe some of the incredible finds I've managed to get my hands on. I want to show how you can achieve some amazing things on a tiny budget with some creative thinking. In the last video, I did the sub-base, floor framing and solid oak flooring, and so far I've only spent £77. Now it's time to skip back to last summer when I started working on the walls. This is all of the reclaimed framing timber that I've managed to get my hands on. While most people would consider this wood waste, to me it represents all of the framing timber that I have to use on this project. And I've organised it here in width order, starting with 5x2 on the left, all the way down to 2x2 on the right. In case you're wondering where all of this timber came from, most of it I picked up for free from a guy that was doing some demolition work, and some of it came from a construction site where I paid just a few pounds for these longer pieces. And just by the way, at this point I'd already de-nailed and de-screwed all of this framing timber. 3 of my 4 walls are going to have either windows or doors installed, so for those I want to use 3x2 or bigger. For the remaining wall, 2x2 will be fine, and I can probably use some of the larger timbers ripped down the middle to give me more 2x2 to work with. And so that's what I did. These pieces end up being a little bigger than regular 2x2 though, which is a bonus. I don't need all of the framing timber sizes to be consistent. And while that will complicate things slightly, this project is all about working with what I've got. And I already had some sketches of what I wanted to build, so from then on it was just a case of finding the pieces of timber that were long enough for the components needed for each wall. I start with finding the longest pieces needed and work my way down to the shorter bits, which I have more of. I just need to cut to length at the miter saw, and then where necessary rip them down to width to match the rest of the timber for each wall. I soon realised though that I was running low on longer pieces. However, I did have this huge 8x4 sleeper here, which I was able to rip down, and this gave me the equivalent of 4 pieces of 4x2 to give me what I needed. And I'm labelling up each piece of timber so that I don't lose track of what's what. Right, that's all my framing cut for the first 3 walls. I decided to leave the 4th wall until later, as I still hadn't quite figured out how I wanted it to be. I've kept this piece aside, which I think is going to become my ridge beam for the roof, and all of this is going to be the timber for the roof. And that leaves me with this stuff, which will become noggins and the framing timber for the final wall once I know how I want it to be. I've bought some new things to play with. Well, not new, but new to me. This is a 19 kilogram propane cylinder. To buy one of these new, full, is about £120. This is a roofer's torch by Grun. This would be well over £100 to buy new. And this is a regulator. I got all of this for £50 on Marketplace. And this cylinder weighs 33 kilograms, which means it's close to being pretty much full. So a real bargain, I think. So charring this wood is going to help to protect it, because basically it coats the wood in a layer of carbon, making it much more resistant to insects and fungi. Plus it'll repel moisture and protect it against UV damage too. So it'll be much more durable than untreated timber, and all without the use of chemicals. It's a method known as shosuji ban or yakisugi, and it's a traditional Japanese preservation technique. So this is in real time here, so you can see it's a pretty quick process really. I blacken all 4 sides and also the end grain too. And I had some water on hand just to stop the timber burning. I stored all of this timber throughout the autumn and winter, outside but under cover, and now towards the end of winter I can assemble the wall frames, and I'm using some 90mm galvanised nails. This first wall is the back wall, and it's very simple: no windows, no doors, and studs spaced equally. The second wall frame is going to have a large window, so I'm framing around the dimensions of the window plus 30mm for the sill, plus another 5mm tolerance to make sure it fits. And the third wall frame is also going to have a window installed, this time a really wide window. Back when I was designing my wall height, floor height and roof structure, I made sure that the maximum height of the building would be under 2.5 meters, so that the building falls within permitted development. I'm making sure my walls are square and spaced apart equally front and back before securing. Now, once again, back to Keith from the past. So I figured out how I want my fourth wall to be built now, and I have lots of these salvaged scaffold boards up here, which I can make use of to cut some more framing. Each scaffold board gave me 3 studs, and if you're wondering why I've got a moustache, I haven't. It's soot from all that timber burning. Once those pieces were also charred, I can start assembling 2 identical wall frames which will later sit either side of a door. These frames are being built to accommodate 2 glazed units which I picked up from Marketplace. I've got some mahogany glazing beads up here, and to make sure that these adhere properly, I'm just going to scrape off some of that charring. For the external beading, I'm cutting a bevel to the bottom piece so that water can't sit on it. And then the next 2 pieces of beading, which will butt up to that bottom piece, will also need 45-degree ends. These glazed panels usually have an outside face and an inside face, so I'm just going to hazard a guess that the side that is the most dirty is the outside face. After cleaning and drying, I used some glass cleaner with a microfiber cloth. This low modulus builder's silicone is good for glazing, or so it says on the tube anyway, so I get a bead added, which I can then seat the glass onto, and then I add some packers which will allow for expansion and contraction. I can then add the internal beading pieces, which I mitered at the corners. A final bead of silicone around the outside edges. And they were ready to install, now a few months later. If all my measurements were correct, this piece of timber should fit nicely in the door opening, and it does. So this can be fitted above the door. And then to beef this up a little, I added a header. Now back to Keith from the past again, when I started building some roof trusses for what will be my first ever Apex roof. I've built 3 sheds in the past, and all of them had a pent roof. The reason I'm opting for an Apex roof this time is because it will allow me to use shorter lengths of timber. Sourcing longer lengths of salvaged timber to span the entire width of the building would have been difficult. This Apex roof will be pitched at 18 degrees, so the rafters need an 18-degree cut where the peak of the roof will be, and a 90-degree cut at the bottom where the eaves will be. So these are my rafters, and they will be positioned like this, either side of this offcut of timber, which represents the size of my ridge beam, which I'll install later. And to complete the trusses, I'll run a beam along the bottom, which is going to strengthen each truss. I'm just lining it up with my measurement marking on each side, and then tracing around the shape, and then I can remove the excess with the circular saw. And then that first beam becomes a template for each of the others to be cut to size, because I need each truss to be consistent. And then I can mark out the holes for 2 bolts on each side to secure the trusses together. Right, so I've cut those birds' mouths, but unfortunately I've hit a snag. It's fouling on the door header. So I'm just gonna whip this piece of timber off, and then that will leave a gap, and then later I can find a piece of timber to fill it. Right, time to install the ridge beam now. I thought I was going to need an extra pair of hands for this, so I asked my wife to help. I think it's just going to need a bit of... But in the end, what worked best was using my squeeze clamps configured as spreaders to lift the rafters, allowing the ridge beam to drop in place. Right, I think we're pretty much there. Unconventional way to build a roof, I know, but it is going to be really strong. For a few months now, I've been trying to source some long lengths of salvaged timber to run along the edges of the roof here, but I've had no luck, unfortunately. And as I am in a hurry to get the building weatherproofed, I ended up giving up and I went to a timber yard. This is pressure treated 45 by 70 mil timber. Now I just need to figure out how big I want my roof overhang to be at the front. And I think it makes sense to space the next roof truss apart by the same distance as the others. So I can cut these short and then add the final truss. Now with a bit of luck, this final truss should just drop in place. At the back of the roof, I'll have a smaller overhang, and I can use what's left from the 63 by 38 mil bearers, which I used in part 1, to finish this off nicely. The next episode in this series is available for early access on my Patreon and YouTube channel membership. There'll be links in the description box below. Now that the frame is complete, let's see how we're doing against the £500 budget. I spent a total of £35 in this one. The salvaged timber was mostly free, but I did pay £8 for some longer lengths. The roofer's torch and gas was £50, but I'm not going to include that in the budget because it's a tool and I'm going to use it again and again. The 2 glazed units I paid £10 for. The guy that was selling them had loads more, but I only needed 2. £5 on some silicone. And the 2 lengths of timber for the roof were £12. If I add on £77 that I spent in the previous episode, I have £388 remaining, and I think I'm going to need it because in the next episode I need to get the building weather tight. I hope you'll join me for that, and thank you for watching.